Welcome to today's webinar in the Keep America Beautiful webinar series, Accelerating the Progress to Litter-Free Communities. Today's discussion will focus on litter in America, facts and trends, the 2020 Keep America Beautiful National Litter Study. I'm April Wennerstrom, Director of Training for Keep America Beautiful, and will soon introduce our panelists. Dr. Helen Lohman, President and CEO of Keep America Beautiful. Dr. David Scott, Senior Director, Research, Monitoring, and Evaluation for Keep America Beautiful, and Veronica Roof, an attorney from Burns & McDonnell's Solid Waste and Resource Recovery Technical Services practice, who served as the project manager for the 2020 litter study. On behalf of Keep America Beautiful and our 700 affiliates, I would like to thank you for joining us today. Keep America Beautiful's mission is to inspire and educate people from all different backgrounds to take action every day to improve and beautify their community environment. As part of that work, we have been leading a webinar series designed to convene discussions to accelerate on the transition to zero waste within our cities, towns, and rural communities. In this three-part series, we'll focus on litter, the trash on our streets and in our waterways, parks, and other spaces that continue to plague many American cities. In this series, you will learn about litter in America, facts, trends, and emerging opportunities, policies and programs that are working to end litter, how efforts to end litter are working not only to beautify communities, but also to unify neighbors to act together to advance shared values. But before we begin this discussion, I just have a few housekeeping notes for today's webinar. To ask questions, please use the question panel on your screen, and we will try to address them at the end of this webinar. Helen will be facilitating this session and will wrap up with an opportunity for Q&A at the conclusion and tell you more about our upcoming webinars and how to register. And please, now let me introduce President and CEO of Keep America Beautiful, Helen Lohman.
Thank you so much, April, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. This is a really exciting presentation for us, because we have recently been working on this huge national litter study. The results are coming in, and just very, very exciting what we're seeing. So we're really eager to share some of the results with you. A little bit about KAB. I know most of you probably know this, but since 1953, Keep America Beautiful has worked alongside hundreds of local affiliate organizations, many of whom are on this call today. So a great shout out to all of them. And also worked with millions of volunteers across the country to clean and green their communities. And the way that we all do that is through ending litter, improving recycling, and beautifying public spaces. So I know we want to get to this, so I'm going to introduce Veronica and David, who are really eager to share with you some of the results from the 2020 litter study. And so I will get right to their introductions. They are both fantastic, amazing, wonderful people who have spent hours, days, weeks, months on this particular research. So let's start with David. Dr. David Scott joined Keep America Beautiful in 2019 as Senior Director, Research, Monitoring, and Evaluation. David oversees research in support of the Keep America Beautiful mission and data and evaluation strategies to help understand the impact of the organization and its network of 700 community-based affiliates. Most recently, David led the Keep America Beautiful 2020 National Litter Study, analyzing the impact of scope, scale, and nature of litter across the country. For more than 2 decades, David has worked at the intersection of data science, research, evaluation, and technology to demonstrate the social impact of nonprofits, corporations, and foundations. So the next person I'm going to introduce is Veronica Roof. Hi, Veronica. Veronica Roof is a project manager in the Burns & McDonnell's Solid Waste and Resource Recovery Technical Services practice. Veronica is also an attorney, I will add. She doesn't have that here. Oh yeah, you do. Veronica served as the project manager for the Keep America Beautiful 2020 National Litter Study. In addition, she was actively involved in the Keep America Beautiful 2009 National Litter Study, as well as other litter studies, including for the states of Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Georgia. Veronica is a licensed attorney in the state of Georgia and a member of the environmental law section and local government section of the State Bar of Georgia. Veronica currently serves as the past president for the Communication, Education, and Marketing Technical Division of the Solid Waste Association of North America and member of the Solid Waste Committee for American Public Works Association. So if everybody will join me in welcoming David and Veronica, I'm going to turn it over to them for the heart of this webinar.
Thanks so much, Helen. Thanks for the lovely intro. I'm very pleased to be here today with my friend and very close colleague, Veronica Ruth, who I've worked very closely with over the course of the past couple of years on this Keep America Beautiful 2020 National Litter Study. Helen's already been through the intros, so let's dive in to the study. But before I dive in to the study, let me take a moment to recognize the organizations who supported the Keep America Beautiful 2020 National Litter Study. Each of these organizations has made a commitment to ending litter in America and supporting the research that informs those solutions. And we could not have done this work without their support, and we look forward to their partnerships going forward. To start with an overview of the study, it's important to point out that the study is actually only the latest in a long line of research that KAB has been involved with since its formation in the 1950s. For more than those 6 to 8, it's going on 7 decades now that we've been around. Keep America Beautiful has served as our country's steward of litter prevention because litter is more than just a stain on our landscape, and it prevents our communities from reaching their true potential. That's in terms of economically, it has a significant negative impact on the environment. It impacts people's lives on a daily basis. Even to the extent of having negative health impacts. And we know that, and this research will continue to show that if we don't deal with litter, not only does it harm the environment in general, more and more these days, one of the things that we're focusing on is that the litter that's on the ground in our communities ends up in our waterways. So litter research has a great influence on many different components of our life. And as I mentioned, we've been doing it at Keep America Beautiful since the late 60s. In 1968 and 69, we kicked off what we refer to as our first landmark study. We studied the attitudes and behaviors of individual Americans about what their awareness was of litter across America and their concerns about litter and why people littered. And we also studied, for the very first time, we went out and we counted litter on the ground across America, and the somewhat grayed out image on the right there is from our archives, the paper copy that we still have of that first national study on the composition of roadside litter. That study went on not only to be the basis for a lot of the research that we did at Keep America Beautiful, and we have done for the next several decades, but it's been the basis of research that's been done around the world by organizations in countries around the world to understand what litter is, the nature of litter, and the problem of littering in their own countries. So that landmark study really kicked off a global movement in trying to understand litter. We followed that up in 2009 with what we consider our second landmark study on litter in America. And that included, not only as we had done in the past, a study of public attitudes and a study of the visible litter on the ground, but we also observed littering behavior so that we could understand better what the influences were on what led people to litter in public spaces, and obviously with an eye towards the sorts of solutions that we could build towards changing those behaviors. And then also what we added in that 2009 study is an estimate of what litter costs America. And the conclusion was that it costs America billions of dollars a year to deal with litter that's on the ground. And with this 2020 study, this represents our third landmark study. We build on the research of 1969 and 2009, modeling the methodology and building on that methodology from those studies that Veronica and I will talk about momentarily, but also going beyond and adding new innovations to the research, two of which we will talk through later. One of the last things that I wanted to point out here is, whilst we do these very large-scale national studies, we also are constantly engaged in smaller scale research, and we use all of this research, both the landscape study, the landmark studies, these large, very broad national studies, and these smaller studies to inform new policies, new programs, new interventions to prevent litter and unmanaged waste in our communities. So everything that we do from a research perspective is practical and is looking to build new and better solutions. And just a highlight of one program that we like to talk about in terms of success that is entirely built on research into human behavior is our cigarette litter prevention program. Now, that took us a number of years of research to understand the behavior related to cigarette litter. And as we will point out here in the study, cigarette butts are the single most littered item in America and in many places around the world. But with our cigarette litter prevention program, we've built a behavioral intervention that, when it's implemented across communities across the US, results in a 50% reduction in cigarette butt litter. So research for us is extraordinarily practical. And that's why we're very excited to talk to you today about this latest study. We also understand that litter by itself is not the goal. Litter is a part of a much bigger ecosystem of problems. It affects our lives in various and profound ways on a daily basis. It affects our ability to truly build a circular economy. It affects environmental community and individual health. It impacts our ability to create clean air and clean water. As we know more and more on with the data that we have that we're gathering across the country, that litter has is a component in environmental justice. And lastly, litter is part of the problem, and ending litter is part of the solution to our climate challenges. And if we're going to solve litter, we have to address both the item of litter and the behavior, which is littering. Let's dive into the methodology briefly. We won't spend too much time before we go into the results. And what we built here with this landmark study is a fully professional effort and built around scientific methodology. And that's to say that what this is not is a citizen science effort. Now, we love citizen science at Keep America Beautiful. We regularly engage in citizen science with our affiliates and with many of our partners. And citizen science has a lot to tell us about the nature of litter in localities or in particular types of litter. But what it doesn't tell us, what citizen science efforts cannot tell us and cannot provide for us, are valid and reliable estimates of what litter is, where it is, how much it is, and how it got there. And that is why we rely on rigorous scientific methodology using a professional team of environmental engineers and environmental management consultants to conduct the study. So this research team, in addition to our own staff at Keep America Beautiful, was the result of a successful collaboration between our primary partner, Burns & McDonnell, but also a Cascadia Consulting Group. Both of those organizations have deep experience with litter studies and a strong understanding of the interconnection between solid waste, unmanaged solid waste, and the environment across America. So They bring a great deal of experience to the table with this work, including having some team members from the 2009 study. We also brought in the Docking Institute of Public Affairs to help us understand the public attitudes. And Valerie Salinas Davis, who many of you might know from her previous work in Enviromedia, who's one of the leading voices in how to talk to the public around environmental issues and how to get people to change their behaviors around the environmental issues. So this deep experience and these leaders that we bring to the study give us the ability to deploy, in some ways, a fairly complicated scientific methodology, but one that gives us an extremely robust understanding of the problem across America and valid estimates of the problem of litter and littering across America. We have a couple of innovations that we're going to talk about, and I'm really going to leave it to Veronica to talk about, but I just do want to mention because they're important. First off, we built a purpose-built litter data collection application for this. It's built on a robust data architecture that will have a significant influence on our ability to not only conduct this study, but to build on the work from this study going forward, both ourselves at the national level, but also with our partners across the US. And secondly, and something that we're incredibly excited about, this is the first study that provides a valid national estimate of how much litter is along US waterways. Now, we spend a lot of time talking about litter in waterways, but this is the first estimate of how much is truly in the waterway environment. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Veronica to give us a little bit more about the methodology.
Thank you, David, and thank you all. We're so excited to be here today to share about this, the Keep America Beautiful 2020 National Litter Study. And it's such a comprehensive study that there's so much to talk about. It's a multimodal research design with 4 major components. The first component was a public attitude survey, which provides an understanding of US residents' opinions about the effects of litter, prevalence of litter, litter and behavior, consequences of littering, and litter prevention and abatement in the United States. The second component was the Visible Litter Survey. It provided a comprehensive understanding of the quantity, composition, and sources of litter on roadways, waterways, and non-roadway sites. The third, which is still ongoing, is the financial cost of litter in America. This research will provide us an understanding of the cost overall, but also the cost as it relates to prevention, education and outreach, abatement, and enforcement. And the fourth component of this comprehensive study was the behavioral observations. The behavioral observations were conducted at sites that were traditionally high traffic and density in regards to consumer and recreational behavior. We wanted to understand the behavior behind littering to address the questions of who litters, where do they litter, how they litter, and how the context of the environment affects the littering behavior. So this together provided us with an abundance of information that we're sharing some key findings today, but we're still digging into the future. During the Visible Litter study, we spent a lot of time to make sure that we had a comprehensive list of products. We had 6 material groups that were subdivided into 86 product material categories, provided us information as to the composition of material that is littered in the United States. In addition, we intentionally structured it so that we can compare to 2009 results. We wanted to understand what progress we've done and what is left to achieve to end litter and littering in the United States. The last component is that we also wanted to add new categories that really reflected the materials and products that are here today. So for example, we added PPE, masks, and gloves, and e-cigarettes. So the comprehensive list of 86 products was intentional and really thought through to provide us information to guide strategies into the future. So our goal with our study was to provide a comprehensive guide to the nature and the scale of the litter problem in the United States. We wanted to understand how we could help make our communities safer, healthier, and more sustainable places to live, and by doing so, making the country a more sustainable and healthier environment. So, as mentioned, and you'll hear throughout, this comprehensive study provided us incredibly rich set of data features. It provided us an understanding of public awareness, attitudes, and behaviors, addressing the scope, causes, and sources of litter, as well as the responsibility for litter and the role of recycling and other policies as it impacts litter. In addition, we received an understanding of the physical attributes and quantities of litter on roadways, along our waterways, and in common non-roadway contexts. We understand now the material sources, the categories, the size, as well as have an extensive database of imagery of litter in America. We also wanted to look into what were those influencing factors. So we understand the features that influence when and why people litter, including the location type, policies, beautification efforts, infrastructure. Is there a littering can there in order to properly manage your material? Traffic and crowdedness, and the walkability. Is there a pedestrian bike path there? How does that impact littering? How much it costs, and then the last component, key component, is how much it costs the public sector to manage litter annually. And we want to look into those costs as it relates to how much are we spending on prevention versus education versus abatement and enforcement. As mentioned, this last component is still underway, and we will ask you all to help us continue to gather that information. We really want to highlight that this study laid the foundation for the data infrastructure. We developed an electronic data collection tool and the data architecture that enabled us to collect real-time and QA/QC the information while in the field for this extensive study nationally. In addition, as David mentioned, it has provided the tool for Keep America Beautiful to also do so into the future, so we can see how programs and experiments impact littering behavior into the future.
Thanks, Veronica. Thanks, Veronica, for that review of the methodology. Let's dive into the results. That's why everybody's here, I think. So, as you can imagine, given the scope that Veronica just laid out, there's too much for us to cover on this study in the course of an hour webinar. But we're going to talk about some highlights, and I'm going to blow the conclusion right here at the beginning with some of the major highlights. First off, it's important for everybody to recognize that litter is still a significant problem in the United States. At the time of the study, we found 50 billion. We estimate that there were 50 billion pieces of litter on the ground across the United States. In that first national estimate of litter along U.S. waterways, what we estimate is that there is at least as much, in fact, slightly more litter along U.S. waterways than is along U.S. roadways. We also found that the littering attitudes and behaviors that are targeted by Keep America Beautiful programs and the litter resulting from those sorts of behaviors continue to improve at a large scale. For instance, we find in this study that litter along America's roads are down 54% since 2009. But the problem is not gone away. In fact, litter is just evolving in the US. As I mentioned before, the single most littered item in the United States is still cigarette butt litter. But cigarette butt litter has decreased dramatically in the past decade. But as it has decreased, other product types have emerged as heavily littered items. And to mention a couple would be food packaging film and alcoholic beverage containers. Veronica is going to take you through a few more highlights.
Thank you, David. As we've heard a couple of times today, combined along our U.S. roadways and along our waterways are 50 billion pieces of litter. And by far, the predominant material is plastic. Nearly 40% of the items that we saw on our roadways and waterways today was plastic. Next slide, David. But This study allowed us to really dive into it to look at the products. And as you've heard, cigarette butt is still the #1 product that we saw on roadways and waterways combined. But we also saw a lot of film, food packaging film and other plastic film, broken glass, polystyrene, beer containers, other beverage packaging. So the information gained from the Keep America Beautiful 2020 National Litter Research Study will really give us an understanding of what products to potentially target strategies to reduce and eliminate litter in the United States. We also were able to compare the current study to the 2009 study. But as noted, the 2009 study was only on roadways. And we did see great progress as it relates to roadways. Cigarette butts were significantly down, actually 70% down from the 2020 to 2009 study. In addition, we saw a decrease in fast food packaging and soft drinks in the 2020 study from the 2009 study. However, some items have increased, such as beer, water, sports drinks, and plastic wine and liquor. But when we look at roadway alone, it presents an incomplete picture. So that's why for the Keep America Beautiful 2020 National Litter Research Study, we purposely, with the support of our sponsors, expanded the study to include waterways. So the litter study estimated that there was 26 billion pieces near or along our waterways. In addition to the approximately 24 billion pieces along our roadways, collectively 50 billion pieces of litter along our roadways and waterways in the United States. In comparison to 2009, we have made progress as it relates to roadways, where we have the information historically. 54% decrease in roadway litter from 2009. When we saw this, we wanted to really compare ourselves to other studies. So we took the national results and we found they aligned with state-specific studies in recent years showing decreases in roadway litter. The question is, how did COVID-19 impact our study? It's highly varied, but litter was up in some communities and down in others, but I'll allow David to jump into that in a couple of slides. So we've really been talking about roadways and waterways overall, but as we alluded to, we have an abundance of information and we divided roadways and waterways into roadway and waterway types. So we have an understanding of litter along freeways, arterial, collectors, and local roads, as well as litter along large perennial, small perennial, and intermittent waterways. And when you look into this data, interestingly, freeways has more litter per mile, 12.6 thousand litter items per mile, in comparison to local roads that have 2.1 thousand. But because of the amount of miles, you can see the total littered items is by far more so on local roadways than freeways. So I know sometimes our efforts may be focused on those freeways, but this is also telling us we may need to also focus on local roads and other areas too. In addition, waterways, it was similar. Large perennials had 3.7 thousand littered items per mile, while intermittent had less littered items per mile. But because of the number of miles of large perennials versus intermittent, we saw that overall intermittents represented more of the total littered items on our waterways in the United States. 90% of Americans believe litter is a problem. And Americans understand the impacts of litter on their communities. Americans understand that litter poses a health and safety risk to people and animals. It impacts our environment. It reduces our property values. As you've seen through this research, it ends up in our waterways. In addition, it impacts tourism and businesses, the local economy, as well as our overall quality of life. David?
Thanks, Veronica, for giving us a few highlights there. There's also a lot of lessons in here, and one of which actually Veronica pointed out there with the distinction between the different types of roadways and waterway types, and thinking about where our efforts in combating litter are taking place as compared to where the litter is actually found. So that's one really important lesson, one with pretty significant policy and practice consequences. Another lesson that we learned is from PPE, or personal protective equipment. Now, PPE became a big part of all of our lives on this call in the past year. It was a critical part of maintaining safe spaces and safe communities during the height of the COVID outbreak. But it also provides a fascinating natural experiment to what happens with litter. And in the case of PPE, when we have what is essentially a brand new consumer product that is adopted at scale across society all at once. For the most part, unless you're in the health sector or in the food service sector, PPE wasn't a significant part of your life, either professionally or at home, but it became a big part of all of our lives, and it was adopted by millions, hundreds of millions of Americans on a daily basis during 2020. So what happened to that PPE? Well, many of you saw in your own communities that PPE got littered. People did not dispose of their used PPE responsibly. The images of PPE across the natural environment, in our communities and in our waterways was everywhere across social media. And received quite a lot of coverage. So one of the immediate questions that people wanted to know was, how much PPE was on the ground? And of the 50 billion pieces, we can estimate that 207 million pieces of PPE gloves and masks were on the ground as part of that 50 billion pieces of litter. About the same as a number of plastic straws that one finds across the US. That alone is interesting. But what's really interesting from where I sit, from a scientist perspective, is what happened to that PPE litter. All of that PPE litter, 100% of that PPE litter started in our communities and on land, so to speak, but it did not stay there. When that PPE got littered, it did not remain in our communities and along our roadways. In fact, when we estimate and when we measure the PPE gloves, for instance, we found that about a third of those littered PPE gloves were found along roadways, but 2/3 of those PPE gloves found their way to waterways. For masks, it was about a 50-50 split between along roadways and waterways. How does it get there? Well, these are generally light items. They can blow quite easily if they are not disposed of properly. But they can also get picked up by traffic or by rain, and as shown here, quite easily through storm drains make it to waterways. So what we know, what we learned from the litter study is something that many of us know already, and that is that litter on roadways will eventually make its way to waterways if it is not abated. So we first want to make sure that we prevent litter, but if litter and littering happen, we need to address it before it gets to waterways, because what it will not do, unless it decomposes or degrades, it will not go away. This has a pretty immense impact on the way that we do our business. We at Keep America Beautiful and our affiliates around the country, but also communities around the US. As you're trying to address the issue of waterway litter, how are you going to address it? From a prevention standpoint, since we know that litter that starts on roadways is going to end up in waterways if it doesn't get managed, then our prevention efforts are really critical along the roadways and in our communities. But once it's on the waterways, we don't have large-scale solutions to cleaning litter along our waterways in the same way that we do with roadways with street sweeping. We at Keep America Beautiful and our 700 affiliates around the country do a lot of cleanups, And those cleanups have to be as it pertains to waterways, those will have to be targeted, because along roadways, those are more easily accessible. And generally, our experience that we found in the litter study is that of the millions of miles of waterways across the US, many of them are really hard to access for cleaning the litter that finds its way along those waterways. And just from a personal experience that I've said before, is a lot of the litter that we found along US waterways was older because it doesn't go away and it doesn't get cleaned up. So if we don't prevent it from getting there, it could stay there for a long time and eventually degrade or decompose and create greater problems downstream. Another thing that we found is, what is it going to take to get people to understand and connect to the problem of litter? Now, the research showed that people understand that litter is a problem. 90% of Americans agree that litter is a problem in their state. And as you saw, as the data that Veronica showed you, about 9 out of 10 Americans recognize that it has pretty significant consequences in their communities on health and on the environment. Now, in the past at Keep America Beautiful, we've tried to make the issue of litter relevant on the ground by talking about how much litter we find per mile along US roadways. Or in our non-roadway areas, we talk about how many littered items are per square foot, say in your local park. And those are important metrics of success for us that we use to understand what good looks like over time in America. But we still, we need to do a better job of connecting to everyday Americans. And what we find in this study is that when we take the calculation of 50 billion pieces and relate it to every single person in America and do the math, what we find is that 50 billion pieces of litter equates to the 50 billion pieces of litter equates to 152 pieces of litter for every US resident in America. So this is an effort at getting something that is so abstract, this 50 billion. I don't know about you, but a lot of people have to think about how many zeros a billion is. 50 billion is an impressive number, but in some ways it's too big and it's too abstract. What we want to do is reduce the distance between the scale of the problem and the solution for the problem. And by talking about this as 152 pieces for every single person in America, the problem becomes meaningful, manageable, and even solvable for every single American. I know personally that I can walk outside my door and within a couple of hours in the neighborhood in which I live, I can pick up 152 pieces of litter and get it out of my neighborhood. Now, even if I did not litter myself or convince myself that I have never littered, which is highly unlikely, but even if I am not littering, the idea that there's 152 pieces of litter says to me that I can be part of the solution. I can personally help to change the problem here. That if I help to prevent 152 pieces of litter per person from getting out there, that's something that I can see that maybe that I might contribute on an annual basis, or that I might go out and be part of the solution to help get off the ground. I can be part of the solution. I can act and help create the solution in America. Now, that's just a highlight. We said there's so much data here that we couldn't possibly go through it. And there are many, many more research documents to come from this work. We've really just sort of scratched the surface with this work. You will see more research and data come from Keep America Beautiful in the coming months on attitudes and behavior related to littering and the financial cost of litter. Eventually, with a comprehensive report about litter. And we will continue to work with our affiliates and with our partners around the country to develop new solutions and continue to deploy the solutions that we know that work, that we have been seeing work over time, that this data provide support for the sort of systemic change that we're looking to create and the collective impact that we're looking to create around the US. We're going to continue to do all of that. But I did want to highlight a few of those solutions. Before I do that, I want to shout back to the research team. And because without these folks at Burns and McDonnell and Cascadia and Valerie Salinas Davis and the folks at Docking Institute, we wouldn't have the understanding that we have today of what litter and littering look like in America. And we are thrilled to continue to partner with these folks going forward. Just like we're thrilled to have the sponsor partners that we have on board here from the Garver Black Hilliard Family Foundation and Dow, Altria, American Beverage, and the American Chemistry Council, and some of the smaller sponsors, because each one of these organizations has made an individual commitment to solving litter in America. Now, they all have different levels of interest, or not levels of interest, topics of interest, but together we're creating a coalition that's really helping us move the needle forward. Now, this legacy of research and our legacy at Keep America Beautiful is built on education, partnerships, and our science-based model for change, which I show here. And we deploy this model for change through all of our programs that get deployed, again, through this unparalleled network of affiliates, of 700 affiliates that we have across the US, and the millions of volunteers and participants who go out to make their communities better places on an annual basis. Now, the reason I bring this up here as a solution is, much like this research, the model for change itself was developed in close collaboration with scientists who applied critical lessons of behavioral science and environmental science to the issue of litter and what it would take to deploy effective policies and effective programs to prevent litter and littering in America. And what we do at Keep America Beautiful, and what we will continue to do with our partners, is apply this long-term behavior strategy in education programs and in place-based interventions, focusing on things such as infrastructure and targeted messages. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about what this is going to take, and not just for Keep America Beautiful, but for all of anybody who's interested across the US, because we know that the progress that we've seen is not simply a function of what Keep America Beautiful has done. It is entirely in line with the change that we seek, and that we have been focused as the nation's largest community improvement organization for, as I've mentioned, for decades. But we need to engage more and more people in that work, because they are the ones who have helped get us to where we are today. One of the things that I mentioned is, whilst we may have been one of the earliest voices in bringing attention to and changing the behaviors around littering, we now see many, many partners around the country, some of whom we have relationships with, but many who we don't, who are taking on this work as our own. State departments of transportation and environmental justice and economic development folks who are talking about littering at the state level, deploying educational campaigns that address the topic of litter in more and more effective ways, often building off the research that we've done, and we're thrilled to see that. But for us, the solutions that we see start, I have to say, with our affiliate network. Now, we have 700 affiliates around the country. That network of community-based affiliates implement all the programs that the litter study indicates are effective at reducing litter. They're deployed at communities all over. But the scale at which we can influence change in America, because we know that our affiliates are the most effective advocates for that change, is by making sure that the current affiliates are empowered to do the work in new and more expansive ways, but also that we're reaching more communities. It is in our strategic plan that we will double the number of communities that we serve, or double the number of affiliates, excuse me, in our network, because we know that our affiliates are incredibly effective at deploying these solutions, because on the ground, they're the subject matter experts in their communities on the issue of litter. They're activating local partners. That's other nonprofits in the area. That's schools, that's local businesses, that's local foundations. They are at the center of these communities, these Keep America Beautiful communities. And their work is critical to developing clean, green, and beautiful and sustainable communities. We also have state affiliates in 2/3 of US states, and they're coordinating and collaborating and building better solutions at the state level with state departments of transportation. Oh, excuse me. State departments of transportation and the organizations that I talked about before. So if you're on the call today and you're from a state or a municipality and you don't have a Keep America Beautiful, please reach out to us, because these folks are your most powerful ally in reducing litter in your state and in your community. And the solutions that I've talked about today, and that I haven't talked about, quite frankly, the programs that we design, the educational programs, the infrastructure programs, the grant programs, our affiliates are the conduit to that at the local level. We're also deploying technological innovations in ways that we've never done. Obviously the 21st century is different from the 20th century, and we were at the leading edge of a lot of innovations at Keep America Beautiful, not only with the litter research, but some of the solutions that are no longer in play. One of which I like to talk about is a photometric index, where we used to take pictures of communities from above and count litter from the sky. Now we have computers doing that work. So at Keep America Beautiful, we're investing in technological innovations that will allow us to track the collective impact of small efforts around the country. Now that could be the small effort of an individual, or it could be a small effort of a community with one event on one day. But when you take all of that together, you have a significant impact in that community. And when you take that effort across the country, we have a massive impact. Together, working together, and building the infrastructure like we have done to track that impact, we can truly understand the systemic change that we're creating. We'll be able to do things like predict and map where litter is in America, and we can track the improvement that we're finding in littering behavior as a result of the interventions and the experiments that we deploy. We're also investing in and trying to get others to understand that infrastructure is a critical part of the solution. Our model for change shows really it can be simplified to a few things, one of which is you've got to start with a clean environment, but then you have to have the right infrastructure in place so that disposal is convenient for people. Littering, we know, is primarily a crime of inconvenience. Do the people walking down the street, driving in their car, have the right disposal opportunities to allow them to get rid of their product properly? We need to have that front-end infrastructure in place. We're talking a lot about back-end infrastructure in America today, especially in the last several months. But that front-end infrastructure in communities is critical to making sure that we keep litter off the street, and in many places, improve the circularity of our economy. A lot of the litter that we found, and we're actually working with Burns and McDonald right now to qualify and quantify this stuff has value. And when it's littered, and when it's, especially when it's littered, it's extraordinarily costly to pick up. And it doesn't provide the value back in. We're also working with new education programs so that citizens and decision makers at the government and corporate level can make better decisions. And that financial cost of litter study that Veronica talked about is critical for that, because when people understand the true costs of litter, which are often invisible inside public sector budgets, but are in fact number in the billions of dollars, we can influence change. And for citizens, we need to continue to educate them that litter is solvable, that we've made significant strides, and we continue to make those strides. And we want to engage them in that solutions in the communities and where they live. So get involved, partner with us, start a Keep America Beautiful affiliate in your state or in your locality if you don't have one. That may seem daunting, but we have a team who does this on a daily basis to support this kind of work in the community. Participate in our financial cost of litter study. You, I'm guessing, are the choir on this call. You know that this is costly. Collaborate with us to document how much that is called. I put Veronica's email up here. She may not like me for doing that. You know, reach out to Veronica, say you want to participate, you want to help us document what it costs to clean up litter in America. And that was breathless, but I'm going to stop and allow Helen to take us through some of the questions that we received from the audience.
All right, well, that was amazing. Thank you so much to both of you. Great job. My dog is shaking her collar right here beside me. So let's get right to the questions, because we have tons of questions, and we won't be able to get to all of them, unfortunately, but we will do our best to get through a few of them. So let's start with, we've had a ton of questions on policy, and policy is an important aspect of how we go about addressing litter. So as everybody probably on this call knows, there's a lot of conversation right now around legislation and on policies that could impact litter. So based on this research, how do you recommend designing effective policies for ending litter?
Well, first off, I would, for anybody who's on the call who hasn't done so, I encourage you to look at the report, kab.org/litter study, where we dive into this in more detail than I can talk about here. I want to say that, we are driven by the behavioral science. That's where we start at Keep America Beautiful. And that behavioral science shows us that effective policies are going to combine educational campaigns that address the particular littering behavior and the particular type of litter that we're trying to solve. One of the things that we find, for instance, is, as you saw, there's a lot of different types of litter, and the solution for one type of litter is not always the solution for the other type of litter. So depending on where you're operating, getting the right message for the right problem is important, and that starts with education. It's also important to provide convenient solutions that I mentioned, the infrastructure for the litterer, because as I said, littering is primarily a crime of inconvenience. I think it's helpful to think about what's the relationship between rewards and penalties here. That's really going to be a local, something that's got to be evaluated locally. We know incentive structures can be effective for behavior change, but it's going to be a function of what it is, what the behavior it is that you're trying to change. And ideally, you would build some evaluation into that that policy structure so that you would know whether it's working. It has to be, I think, from where we sit, it has to be, because we deal with communities of varying sizes. Some of our communities do not have a lot of resources. So it has to be financially sustainable over time. One of the things that's often not talked about in the policy that I would like to talk about as it pertains to littering and littering is making sure that your solution is empowering the organizations who are on the ground doing the work in the communities to prevent litter and littering. So for instance, we know that starting with a clean space is the single most effective thing that you can do at a starting point to prevent litter. So are you supporting the organizations out there who are cleaning spaces, who are getting the volunteers out, who are doing frankly the unpaid labor of helping us succeed? Now, that's a general thing. There are lots of specific policies, some of which we talk about in the report, around what it means, what good looks like, what we found from the data, and I encourage folks to take a look at that.
And I concur 100% with what David has said, but I want to add just a little bit that first, and thank you so much for Keep America Beautiful for taking the lead with this. We needed the information, we needed the research to justify what policies were required to move us forward to eliminating litter. But as David mentioned, it is great to develop policies that are specific to the issue in your community, but also you also need to have enforcement in place in order to enforce those policies. Because by reading the report, you'll see the public attitude surveys as to the public's opinions as to policies that are in place and as to whether they are enforced and what are the impacts when policies are not enforced.
Great, thanks to you both. David, you mentioned, you know, basically specific solutions for specific types of litter. And we did get a question that asks, what constitutes a piece of litter? And how does this study look at, you know, weight, volume, piece, etc.?
Yeah, I think I would like to meet a lot of these people asking these questions. They're my people. So yes, tracking the work that we've done over the past several decades, we do count this particular litter research, we count litter by the piece. So that is an individual piece of litter on the ground that has not been contained. It has not been properly managed. That is the definition of litter, is improperly managed waste. Now, there are a lot of specific definitions around that. So for instance, if we saw something that was damaged, we did not count that as multiple pieces if it was clearly from one piece. So if we saw a beer bottle with a brand name on it that was glass and was broken and was scattered you know, in a single place, we did not count that as 20 pieces. It was counted as a piece. But the person brings up an important point about what about weight, what about volume? And for the different type of solution that we're looking for, all of those things matter, but they matter for different reasons. If you're trying to get it off the ground, the count matters because each piece has to be managed. If it has to be moved, the volume matters because some things are very lightweight but very large and can take a lot of money to move. And if you're interested in preventing some of the damage to the environment, especially around plastic, the weight really begins to matter a lot more. So we're working, and again, we're working with Burns & McDonnell and some of our other partners on this to really understand and translate and build a conversion tool so that we can make clear going forward the relationship between counts and weights and volume.
Great, thank you. I'm going to do one more question and then we will talk about wrapping it up. Can you guys talk about any tips for presenting this topic in areas that don't have any traditional waterways?
Yeah, can I take this one too, Veronica? Okay. So I think what we have, you know, so we took a comprehensive view of what defined a waterway in America. And as the data that Veronica showed, the majority, I believe, of waterways, surface waterways in the US are what are called intermittent streams. Now, those come from groundwater, but they are not always flowing throughout the year. There are also things that we didn't study called ephemeral streams, which do not have groundwater supplies. But this is what we do know, is that that's where the litter is. A lot of the litter is on those intermittent streams, and I would hypothesize along the ephemeral streams too. So I would encourage you to talk to people about those waterways and try to raise the issue to folks that these things feed the larger waterways. So the thing that's along your creek bed that only runs a couple of times a year, you take somewhere like New Mexico, where I think 90% of the waterways are intermittent and are dry at some point of the year. But even in New Mexico, you know, getting people to be aware of where those intermittent streams are, the creek beds, there's going to be some language that they use in the community. In mine, it's the dingle. There's going to be some language that you use in the community. I would encourage you to use that language. Make sure people know that water is running through there and that those creek beds, which are often hotbeds for illegal dumping, those places are part of our watershed, and that they are eventually going to make it to the larger waterways and become part of the much bigger problem.
Great, thank you. And these questions were incredible. There are tons more. I wish we could get to all of them. I would encourage everyone, if you have a question that we didn't get to, please download the study. You can find it at kab.org/litter-study. I will ask April if she can put that in the chat for everyone. So you'll have a link to where you can go to get the summary document. And I also would just want to share with you some details about our next KAB webinar series. That's going to allow us to build on our current series, venturing into exploring the transition to zero waste communities, and today's discussion about the 2020 litter study. The next webinar is on July 14th at 2 p.m. and we'll focus on ending litter policies and practices. And we're gonna, for that panel, we're gonna have community leaders, public officials, and others who are actually on the front lines of litter reduction to explore and discuss what's working in American communities. And then the last webinar on this series will conclude on August 18th at 2 p.m. and focus on litter-free communities and how to build community through activities and partnerships. So on that webinar, we're going to host researchers and activists who will be discussing how cleaning and greening and beautifying communities all comes together. So you can find lots of details at kab.org under the resources section, and I hope that you can join us for those additional 2 webinars that build on this one. On behalf of everyone at Keep America Beautiful and our national affiliate network, I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and a thank you to David and Veronica for their insight into this research. Have a great afternoon, everyone.